Okay, joining us today for Q&A with Ziegler Estate Law Group, we have Garrett Black. He is a wealth protection attorney with a focus on business planning, and we have some great questions to pick his brain about. So, first one is, if I don't own or run a business, why would I want to form a limited liability company? Great question.
That is a good question. So there's more uses for a limited liability company than simply, running a business. It does have the name company in it, but a lot of times we'll use them for our clients that have real estate, whether it be farmland or just a piece of property that, has been passed down from generation to generation. Or if it's mineral interests, like producing oil wells that you might lease out. Putting those into an LLC rather than holding them individually or even in a trust directly gives you long-term efficiencies in transfers. So let's say if it's held by you individually and you have 3 children, well, when you pass away, there's 3 deeds that have to be done to deed those interests to all 3 children. And then if those 3 children all have 2 kids, that's another 6 deeds that we have to do. Instead, if we move that real property or those mineral interests into an LLC while you're still alive, then when you pass away, we don't have to do any kind of redeeding, no transfers, because the LLC still owns that property. The difference is your kids and or grandkids or whoever your beneficiaries might be would own an interest in the LLC, and that's much easier and much more efficient to do than having to draft deeds, get them signed and notarized, and then recorded with however many counties there could be. So just because it has the name company in it, and most people do tend to use them for small businesses, you don't have to run or own a business to make use of an LLC.
Okay, great. So let me ask you a follow-up question about that. So I heard when you were talking about the trust, when you were saying this structure, it could be preferable to deeding those mineral interests or whatever it is directly into a trust. Tell us a little bit about that distinction, because you're talking about you can, of course, put the LLC in a trust, which is often what we would do, right?
Right. That's right. So say you came in and we got you set up with a trust-based estate plan. Instead of deeding whatever property you have in your name into the trust name, we would deed it into an LLC, and that LLC would be owned by the trust. And what is also beneficial about this is using an LLC with just that single member, that single owner being the trust. The LLC is what's known as a disregarded entity for federal income tax purposes. And in Texas, we don't have a state income tax, so it's basically the same thing. It doesn't have to file its own tax return. It just goes directly onto the tax return that the trust would file, or if it's a grantor trust, like a revocable trust, then it's typically the grantor's personal tax returns that it would get reported on. So it doesn't add any filing or tax related complexities. It just gives you those efficiencies and long-term transfers, and then of course, as the name implies, that limitation of liability and some asset protection around that property and those mineral interests.
Great. So I have a great question for you, Garrett, and one that a lot of business owners need to hear the answer to, I think. Okay, if I formed an LLC online with the Secretary of State, I don't need to do anything else, right?
Not quite. That is a great start to getting that limited liability protection and those efficiencies that we just talked about. But simply filing that certificate of formation online doesn't give you the liability protection that you're looking for. What does are your internal governance documents. Those will be your member and manager resolutions. Members are the owners of the LLC. And then in particular the company agreement. So the company agreement is what lays out who the manager is and what their specific authority is versus what they have to go and get member or owner approval for. And it also lays out how and why the business liabilities and damages that might arise out of the business are limited to the business and not don't reach to the owner's assets. So the company agreement is what really gives you that liability protection and protects your personal assets, your house, your cars, your vacation homes, whatever it might be, from damages or injury that might be caused from your business's activities.
Okay. So, bottom line, if you have an entity that you filed with the Secretary of State, but you don't have these governance documents, you likely do not have any asset protection.
That's correct. The asset protection is really not there. You can still get some of the efficiencies maybe for transfers and things like that, and maybe the ability to write off some home office things, but um, the liability protection isn't there without those internal governance documents to kind of lay out what happens in certain situations.
Kind of reminds me, it's not the same thing, I know, but when people decide to do a trust based plan, if the trust, just setting up a trust doesn't protect anything if it's not funded, if the assets aren't actually transferred into the trust, it can't protect them. So, okay, one more question I have for you. What kind of company do I need? And I know that's like a big question, but S Corp, LLC, partnership, C Corp, what kind of company do I need?
That is a very nuanced question. So I would first tell you to probably come in and see us and we can talk more details. But generally, um, we most likely use LLCs. They're more flexible and they work really well for a mom and pop business or simply owning holding farmland. Um, as that business might grow, you might look at converting an LLC to an S corporation for better self-employment tax benefits. And then in certain cases, you might want to set up a limited partnership where if you have multiple business partners, you can kind of offshoot any liability to a general partner, and the limited partners get a little bit more liability protection with some flexibility in true partnership structures. And then a C corporation, typically, we only use those in very specific circumstances. You see them a lot in the news and on the stock market. Almost every publicly traded company, at least in the U.S., is a C corporation. That has more to do with the robust nature of how C corporations work internally with a board of directors and then managerial divisions, and there's more rigidity, but that also tends to make them more stable. So when you have public public putting money into a company, they want that stability, uh,
Hmm.
and so they'll kind of trade the flexibility for stability once it gets that big. But generally, for most of our clients, we use the LLC and then S corporations most often. But again, it all depends on your specific circumstances.
So when a person comes into our office and they're looking at doing some business planning, what are some of the types of questions we're going to be asking them about their business and about their family situation that would help inform what we would recommend?
Yeah. So I would ask if the business is already really operating and you're kind of maybe you've watched a webinar or one of these videos and thought, well, I have a business, I need to really, set it up legitimately and not just kind of run it as myself. That would be like a sole proprietorship.
Okay.
I would want to know if you've been running a business and kind of what we want to structure around so that we don't change anything if you have a built up client base. We don't want to, change things around that confuses your clients or customers and then they don't want to come back. Um, versus if you're just now starting and kind of what your business is, what you're going to be doing. Is it a good? Is it a service? Is it software? Is it a patent that you own and you want to license it out to other people to um, put into their goods and services? And as far as the family goes, I would want to know how involved the rest of your immediate family is. If it's going to be, you and your children, or maybe siblings running it together, versus just you and a non-familial outside business partner. There are different structures that, and depending on your family relationships, if it is all family, but you think there's a chance that it could go poorly somewhere down the future, there's
Which
all
happens.
yeah, right. And there's all sorts of things that we can build into the company agreements and the specific company structure that we choose based on your specific circumstance and what you want to protect versus where you want flexibility.
Great. Yeah. The bottom line, come see us. You don't have to understand all these concepts. That's why we're here to ask the right questions and make sure that we understand how your business operates, what your goals are, who you envision continuing to be involved. Okay, business succession planning, Garrett. What is it? Who needs to be thinking about business succession planning? Talk to us just about what that looks like.
Yeah. So business succession planning, you think of that like a will or a trust plan for your company. What happens to the company after you pass away? Especially if you're the only owner, maybe your spouse or kids don't really care to continue working in the business. They have their own endeavors that they want to pursue. Um, what happens to the business? Maybe your spouse can't even continue the business if it's a professional business like a law firm or a CPA, or maybe a some sort of medical service business like an anesthesiologist. Um, Only licensed professionals can be owners. So if spouse isn't in the same profession, that is also an issue, and you want to make sure that something happens to the business, whether it gets sold to somebody who continues to operate it or stays in the family with somebody who continues to operate it, or it just liquidates. You sell the assets, kind of cash out, and beneficiaries of the estate kind of can do what they want with all that cash. Really, the people who need to be thinking about this are people who really have that operational business, not necessarily just having an LLC to hold um, real property or mineral interests, but those that have an operational business that they want to see continue past either their death or retirement. So it really applies to almost every business owner. I don't know many business owners who want to start a business and then don't care to see it flourish. That doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
But so I would say every business owner can benefit from succession planning because you never know what might happen to you tomorrow. But as far as when you should start approaching that, it's never too early. Obviously, things change as your business grows. So I would say whenever you do put a plan into place, revisit it every year or two just to make sure the people that you maybe named to take over the company are still, you know, there and still willing and able, and you still have the relationship with those people that you did before. So it's never too early, but it's also something that kind of ebbs and flows as your business grows.
And I can imagine that this succession planning is something that would be really important to couple with a good estate plan. Because especially with a family business where maybe you have 3 kids and one of them works day to day in the business and knows it inside and out, and the other two either aren't involved or, now and don't care to be involved in the future, or maybe just involved to a lesser degree. And
Yeah.
so I could imagine there's some real estate planning questions there. If I'm going to give the business to the son that's very involved, and am I going to offset that in some way in my estate planning, with my assets otherwise, and how those are distributed after my death?
Yeah. And that's a good point, and it's a good segue in tandem to another situation that comes up a lot. Is, say you have a business, but none of your kids or spouse really wants to run it or can run it. That doesn't mean they can't be owners, and
Mm.
so we can kind of pair a business succession plan with your estate plan. So once you pass away, the children, spouse, other beneficiaries of your estate plan are still owners of that business, but some other third party, maybe it's your right hand man while you were running the business, or it's somebody else comes in and takes over that kind of CEO role and continues to manage the business, run the operations, and obviously for a salary and all of that. Business planning plus estate planning can really specify who you want to own a business versus who you want to manage it, and make sure that even if no one in your family can or wants to run it, they can still benefit from your hard work of building it even after you're gone through their ownership.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Happy to do it.